It is on YouTube.
Welcome back. We're now on item 9 reports. The first one is 9.1, TAKUTAI Kapiti Officers Report to Accompany Co-Design Working Group Report. We have managed this in the Mayoral Task Force on Waste Minimization, where the report, the working group came and made a report. And now I'm going to ask members of the working group to have 3 minutes each. The first speaker is Natalia Ripia, Ngāti Toa representative. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Natalia Green Ripia toku ingoa. I'm the representative for Ngāti Toa. I did have a presentation that I've already given, so I thought I'd give a summary of what the makeup of the composition entailed for the council, and I guess for the rest of the room here and the working group. So during the time that the working group came together, we have had lots of difficulties with attending. And that's because the structure is that there's 3 mana whenua. There's actually more, but there's 3 main mana whenua, and we don't have capacity, meaning that we don't have people that can come and do things every day. We have to shuffle our programs around, and in fact, what I should have said when I first got up here was apologies from Dr. Aroha Spinks and also from Dr. Mahinarangi Baker. Mahinarangi is away on maternity leave, couldn't make it. Te Rangi Maria Williams, who was, I guess, the proxy in place of Mahinarangi, can't make it as she's attending whānau in Wellington Hospital ICU. And as I said before, Dr. Spinks has left for Auckland, I believe, on another matter. So some of those difficulties you can sort of get an idea and understanding that we don't get to sort of attend every hui that we would like to, and for that reason there's a bit of a gap with us in our attendance. One of the main messages and key messages I think would like to convey is that there's 3 mana whenua, but because of that capacity issue, we've decided to have 2 representatives per mana whenua, so 2 Ngāti Toa, 2 Atiawa, 2 Raikawa. And then we also thought to ourselves, well, what can keep us culturally safe from any spiritual or verbal attacks? And usually that's the role of the kaumātua. And kaumātua sit and do karakia. They start us off with karakia. They finish us off with karakia, and it gives us sort of a feeling that you're safe to be able to say what you need to say without worrying about attacks, because usually if there are, that's when our kaumātua will sort of put their hand up like me Guru does and sort of, what's a nice way of putting it, make it all no and safe again, you know, in such a beautiful way as well, kaumātua do it. So we didn't see a problem with the composition as per se, because if you looked in the members' box, if you will, there were 6 iwi, 6 community, and then if you looked in the other box, which was the observers panel, there were 4 community and 1 kaumātua representing iwi. So we thought that even though there was an overtip of the balance wasn't quite right, and that there were actually more community than there was mana whenua, we thought that would be okay, because it had already been discussed at previous meetings that would be okay, between iwi, that is. So I heard the buzzer go off. It took too long, so I'll just leave it there and take questions if you would like to offer some.
Councillor Coates.
Morena, Natalia, thank you for coming along and talking to us. You mentioned gaps in attendance. I'd like you to elaborate further, I guess, on the question is around the expectations on iwi to participate in not only council activities, but NZTA activities, Greater Wellington Regional Council activities, central government activities. and other council activities on other borders. Could you maybe explain what the expectations are on iwi in terms of those other appointments, to give a broader context in terms of the demand on their time? I think the Te Atiawa review identified 26 appointments just within Kapiti Coast, and that was just with not even Greater Wellington and so forth.
I guess the expectation is that I'm supposed to sit here and speak on behalf of all three, but actually I'm only really here on behalf of Ngāti Toa. And so how do I be... the expectation is that I'm supposed to be here, there and everywhere, and I just can't. And lots of councils, different organisations usually sort of find ways around to accommodate for us, but yeah, the expectation is so great that we actually can't fulfil lots of our roles in different councils, whether that's local, Greater Wellington, and the other community boards that everyone else is sort of sitting on within iwi, that is.
I know, for example, through our long-term planning processes, some members even had to take paid leave off work to be able to attend. Is that it? Yeah. And so likewise, you're often asked to attend things, for example, with Greater Wellington around the whaitua process and so forth. So there's a lot of demands on the time, but often not the remuneration that goes with it in terms of...
Necessarily always get remunerated. It was quite interesting listening to the discussion before break about the representation and the remuneration that didn't even realise that communities could apply for. Yeah.
Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My question. Thank you very much for your talk, but my question relates to the partnership. Now, the council has a partnership with Crew. Did it come up in any of the discussion whether Crew should have specifically mentioned that they should have a representation on the committee?
In discussion today, it may have been discussed at one of the working group hui, but I was definitely not in attendance when that was discussed. And so I guess from an iwi perspective, the partnership between community and council is different actually, in fact, to the partnership between iwi and government and the Crown. I think for ki toku nei whakaaro, my whakaaro is that we don't sit at the same level. And so without diminishing or making light of community boards, we would see for a treaty perspective, maybe we could have, as a community board, we would see the weaving community sit on one of those boards, or we would expect that they would fill those positions. But from an iwi perspective, we wouldn't be sitting at a community board level. That would be for the rest of Te Ao Māori, those that live within Kapiti community, who are part of a board, for lack of a better word, a committee, an informal one. So they don't necessarily, the weaving committees don't necessarily sit down and have minutes and stuff, but they might sit down and decide that actually we might want to plant along such and such area, or we might want to make some weaving gifts to koha out to whoever we might want to do. They might want to do those things. I say we because I am a weaver, but not on a weaving committee as such. I hope that explains. Yeah.
Councillor Compton.
Through the Mayor, just building on Councillor Coote's question about the demands on iwi's time, in terms of Ngāti Toa in particular, can you, just to put those demands in scope, in terms of the rohi covered by Ngāti Toa, can you sort of outline that geographical area, just in terms of, I guess, the various district and city and regional councils you're dealing with?
I'm in one space in one council, so Ngāti Toa spans across 11 councils from around here or heading down to the top of the South Island. Yes. And we don't have everybody in. There are a few councils where we actually don't have any representation because we just don't have anybody that's available. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Halliday.
Hi, Natalia. Thank you for coming in. Just one thing I just wanted to clarify. There looks to be what's been recommended to us is 6 iwi members on the committee, yet we're being told that iwi's struggling to commit to the arrangements that they already have. Do you see there being issues here ongoing with regards to the ability for Ngāti Toa to constantly supply 2 people into this process?
Well, I don't really think there will be, because there's the representatives that have stepped forward now, and then there are those that have the ability to be able to sit in positions but may not be part of the governance or part of the team at iwi. So we can sort of filter out from Ngāti Toa's perspective. I'm not going to speak on behalf of the other 2 iwi, but from Ngāti Toa's perspective, we're just starting to grow now. Just sort of starting to look for resource management workers and whatnot and apply for them now. So we're starting to build. Through Helmut's appointment, we've actually, as an iwi, identified there are way more people in this space, not just this space, but also they own their own businesses, who are consultants, who can actually do this mahi, but they're part of our iwi, yes, they're on our iwi books, yes, but they're not at the runanga, and the runanga is what kind of helps, is like another arm of iwi that helps build the capacity. So while there might not be many workers in the runanga per se, there are actually lots of iwi members that can fulfil those roles, but they may need remuneration to be able to participate. As we've identified earlier, there are some that have to not work in one job just to come in front at another job. And usually in Te Māori, we're not kind of looking at the money aspect of things, we're sort of looking at people to get in there to do the mahi, to give a whakaaro Māori to the process, to the council, to help educate as well, help educate council, community about what we're here to do. We're not here to take over and try and rule the world. We're here to stand and say we are here. We weren't at capacity 180 years ago. We are starting to just sort of get there, start the wheels moving now, and this is 180 years later. So I do feel for the crew. Although 2014 they've only been waiting for that long, we've been waiting for a heck of a lot longer, and we're just starting these wheels now. And so I'd like to say that we can fill those roles. And the other reasoning behind that role, I just would like to take this opportunity to say, is that if there's 2 mana whenua for Ngāti Toa sitting at that table and one of us can't make it, the other will make the choice to go. So we'll kind of tag team so that somebody can be representative, and so that the wheels of motion don't stop in its tracks. And it would be up to the iwi member that's been appointed to then go back and make sure the other iwi member is informed, so that things just don't stop, because things will stop if we don't have that kind of backup.
Just building off the back of Councillor Halliday's comment, the current involvement hasn't been paid, has it?
Not for all iwi, no.
So there is a real difference between having to take time off work currently, unpaid time off work to attend, and the new proposed structure where you will be able to receive some remuneration which could assist with being present.
Councillor Pravanov.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Natalia, for coming along again. So I hear what you're saying in terms of the demands on all 3 iwi, and so the table here says a maximum of 6 people. So is it fair to say, or maybe clarification about having two people from each iwi on the panel, but potentially only one person might be able to attend? Is that?
The goal is for both to attend.
So that leads to my other question. So if one iwi only had 1 representative and the other 2 or 1 had 2 representatives at a particular meeting, is that problematic?
So
Thank you very much, Natalia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now the next speaker is Joe Rosier, North Otaki Beach Residents Group. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship, councillors. I'm representing Norberg because I was one of the original witnesses for the...
Is your speaker on?
Sorry? I was one of the members of the original group that mounted the appeal. We're a very loosely structured organisation. Once we came to an agreement with the council, we started drinking rather than making decisions. We have little get-togethers once a month. So we're not probably as organised as Crew. Not all our residents are property owners. Some of them are people who are renting. Some of them are people who don't necessarily live in North Otaki Beach but are members of the Stream Care group. So we have quite a diverse membership. And one of the reasons why I like this working group process is that we need to separate out two things. The first one was, if we're going to have a new approach, then it had to be an integrated approach. In the past, just looking at the district plan provisions alone, dealing with natural hazards, is not enough. Not all our coast is an eroding coast. From Te Hapua Road upwards, north, we generally have an accreting coast apart from problems with storm surges and things like that. And so I think, to me, the strength of this process is that we're choosing or suggesting the nature of a panel that would deal with the wider issues of climate change and coastal problems, not just focusing on district plan provisions for coastal hazards. I think the other thing that I found about the process was that because of COVID-19, council staff had to go through extraordinary processes to get us into meetings. And so I learned how to Zoom, for example, which was, I think, one major tick that I've listed to my CV. And I think the council officers did all they could to keep this process moving, even though we were in difficult times. We had a number of robust discussions. I disagree with Crew in that I don't believe, as a planner, that it's appropriate for us to set the terms of what the panel, or how the panel will operate. To me, that's something that needs to be decided between council staff, the panel and council when that panel is appointed. Secondly, I think it's very important for us not to question iwi involvement. To me, that's something that the council works out with local iwi. I think whatever number of representatives they think is appropriate, I think the number of representatives that should be on the panel. They are looking at wider issues than just coastal hazards, and that knowledge that they would bring to this process would be very important. I think the council officers did very well in managing our discussions. The council officers also invited regional council officers to come to meetings, and we now have an idea that there's some kind of link coming between catchment management and coastal management, which, of course, as a planner, is what I've always wanted. That was our biggest beef with the council provisions originally anyway. I'll leave it at that, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Rob McCann.
Thank you for coming, Jill. I just wonder if you could give us a couple of the reasons why you think it's not appropriate for the to set the terms of reference and why.
Terms of reference. I think I'm more worried about telling the panel how to do it. To me, the role of this working group was to establish some of the things that need to be considered, membership of the panel, some of the process issues, but I think the detail of what happens next in the panel is going to depend on the advice of the expert that is brought into the process, working with council officers on their instructions from council. I think this is too premature for us to make this call on process. I mean, as a planner, I'm fanatical about process, so I strongly believe that the process has to be set by the group making the recommendations to council.
Thank you. That's a really helpful answer, and it will lead a question to staff, which is, will that terms of reference that is suggested come back to council for ratification?
Yes.
You just keep your questions to they can be answered. Councillor Coates.
I had a similar question around the comment you made earlier around the inappropriateness of the panel members forming the terms of reference for the new group. However, you've sort of partially responded to Councillor McCann about that. So I will ask a slightly different question around being one of the two groups that confronted council over the coastal provisions, and knowing the challenges that we've had over the last 12 or so months. Can I take it from what you've said that generally you're happy with the process up till this date around the paper that we had before us and the contents of the paper that the councillors are considering?
Yes, I've talked with another senior member of our group, and we're happy with this process. In addition to being happy with the report and the process, I think we've got to remember we're not always going to all agree, and likewise on the panel there'll be robust discussions because of the differences in the different parts of the coast. In terms of membership of I would like to see not just residents or ratepayers. I'd like to see other people such as the Otaki River Group, groups that are there looking at riparian management, which is going to help us again deal with some of the climate change issues.
Thanks very much, and thanks for coming in.
There seems to be no other questions. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jeffrey Taylor, Wakanai East Free Care Group.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors.
Welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak in respect to this paper. Rather than delve into the detail of the paper, because I think that's been well covered by some of the previous speakers, I want to confine my comments to two matters of context: the voice for the environment and the voice of the community. Climate change and coastal adaptation are undoubtedly a challenge for the district's built environment and infrastructure services. Equally, they are an issue for our local natural biodiversity, both in terms of preventing further loss of valued natural resources and the potential mitigation of the impacts of climate change. But they have no deliberative vote on council adaptation measures except through the strong voices of local conservation and environment networks. They, our present flora and fauna, have an equal right to be heard and represented in the long-term policies and practices of the council. To this end, the report on page 3 notes the need for the proposed panel to be aware of and informed by related processes underway in the district. And the two projects mentioned have specific relevance to coastal adaptation, and there are many others. Locally, we have a community increasingly sensitised to the issues of climate change and coastal adaptation, and their voices must be encouraged and listened to, as opposed to just passive acknowledgement. There is a significant history associated with coastal adaptation in Kapiti. We need to learn from that and collectively move forward with urgency. Above all, we must ensure that the processes are well informed, evidence-based, inclusive and transparent, and that it is not overshadowed by history and predetermination. Thank you.
Any questions? Doesn't seem to be any, so thank you very much for your... The next speaker is Quinton Poole from Crew.
No, I'm not representing Crew, I'm representing the panel. I've got a report here I'd like to table.
You're not representing Crew?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm a member of the panel. We've got all that business to enter the panel.
Mr. Poole, I'm not very clear. You're speaking because these are all representatives of the different groups. So,
okay, yes, I was As a member of crew, yes,
So are you speaking
as a member of crew, we're invited to the initial meetings. Once we're on the panel, we put that aside to work as a group. And that's what I'm trying to infer, sir.
Can I ask for advice from Lindsay? Or Sean? Somebody?
Do you want me to speak? So the terms of reference that we agreed to as the working group was that representatives sat on that working group of the different groups, of which Quentin and Paul, as representatives of crew, sat on the working group. So this is news to me, certainly.
Sean?
Well, I was just going to say, so I guess that's the reference to the terms of reference. As far as Mr. Paul's comments today, I mean, I can't comment on his view of that, but that's what the document says in terms of that membership. So the members were there representing the groups that they were party to.
That is correct, sir. But once we
Let me be very clear. The speakers are all representatives of the working group, and they all designated Ngāti Toa, North Otaki Residents Group, Waikanae East Free Care Group, and I will be asking Ian Daw from Regional Council whether he wants to answer any questions. So are you representing crew or are you not?
Yes, I will represent crew.
You are representing crew?
Yes. Right, thank you very much. Right. The members' report I've tabled today is an aid to be constructive, not destructive. I think the realisation councillors must have is that we have been trying for ages to resolve the issues. I stood up here in 2019 and implored you as councillors not to take our budget, the budget that you'd allocated, away for climate work to be used on the independent review. We have worked all the time trying to resolve this issue. The problem we can see is that it is not focused enough. And we think there are ways around it. If you're really keen as councillors, I think you've got to take control of it. You set the resolutions back in 2014 for CAG. You now have a CAP, which is doing something sort of what CAG was going to do, but is not doing what CAG was envisaged. And you've got to disconnect. So I think you've got to work out in your minds how you're going to resolve it. Salim has already told you there's a legislative requirement under the CAG which you're not fulfilling, which is dangerous and is a risk to the council. So how do you resolve it? I think you've got to, I'd be really worried on your governance issues as councillors that you haven't got a terms of reference. You've got nothing to measure it against. You've got, CAP at the moment can do anything and you've got no way of controlling it as councillors. And yet it has to report to you and is meant to produce outcomes. I think that's dangerous. In my report I've presented today and tabled, and you've all had copies last night, and sorry for the lateness of it, I was actually at work. I didn't get home until 9 o'clock, and I managed to finish that off and get it to you at 9:30. The issue, and I think Paul has already discussed it about the financial commitments, and thinking about that, I think it's that is much even too broad to go. I think you've got to make an in principle decision to try and deal with the council responsibilities vis-a-vis the ratepayers and other people in the community. the issues of the tour, terms of reference, I'd be very worried as councillors. It is your job for governance, if you've got no means of measurement, and if you're setting up a panel, you don't know what this panel's meant to be doing, and it's going to write its own terms of reference. That is even more of a recipe for disaster. It was interesting this process was called community-led, and it turns out it's not going to be. I think we've demonstrated over the years that the community has immense strength in Kapiti, and we are so fortunate that we have got this strength and the ability of people to help the council. And that is what we've been trying to do all the way through. We've butted heads at times. We won't, and as the previous speaker said, we will not win on every occasion, and we don't expect to win. But what we want to do is develop the best for Kapiti. And I think that is the thing you must take forward. As a Maori, I work in the community only. I understand the governance under the treaty. And I think it's interesting that the iwi are talking about having 6. When they should actually have a 3-on-3 representation. There's 3 Crown entities. There should be the 3 iwi entities. If they want alternatives, yeah, let's arrange that. But doubling up just for the sake of whether someone can turn up or not is not the answer. In the report, we accepted in the end that there should be 4 iwi representatives plus a kamatu. And we stand by that report. These late changes that are coming in, I don't think does us any favours, especially when it's meant to be community-led.
Right. We've all received your document from last night.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
And your matters you're raising. Right. And I'm open up for questions. Councillor McCann.
Just for clarity, from your oral presentation, who do you think should be writing the terms of reference?
Well, mouth very dry, sir. Yeah. It has to be a combined effort. If you want something done very quickly, I know the person you should be speaking to, and that's Dr. Paul Dunmore. He's got, yeah, but that is will not work because it's got to be not a duality, but a coalescing of the groups. But it can be done quickly. It is not a major issue. Last time, like the CAG tour, which I was involved with, it took us less than a month from the time I don't know how long it took the council to draft their 38 pages, but we got our one done in, I think it was about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Just clarify the question, because it's probably a simple answer. Who do you think should be writing the terms of reference? I don't really think you answered it. Sorry, I may have misheard.
It should be the community, along with the iwi, along with council staff.
And who designates who the community is?
You do, because you have the control. It is your cap. It is not. It is something of council. It is not ours. Okay?
Councillor McCann, I think your question has been answered now. Councillor Holborough.
Yeah, thanks for coming along and speaking today. Good to see you, Quentin. So, we have a report in front. We have two reports in front of us. We've got the staff report and we've got the working group report. So my understanding is that the working group report at Appendix 1, which is on page 12 of our agendas, was approved by consensus by the working group. Is that right? So the crew representatives approve of the various sections of that report, including the panel composition and appointment.
Can you read out that panel composition?
It's in the working group report, so you should be familiar with it. So the panel. I was more interested in the panel appointment actually. So which is the same in the staff report. So you're in agreement with all of those? Great, thank you.
Councillor Pravano.
Thank you. So, through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for coming along today. So, it's my understanding that is it correct that the working group disbands tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay. So, as far as you're concerned, they've done their job in terms of what they need to do for this process?
We have presented a report for this meeting.
So, been several questions about developing a terms of reference. In your opinion, or in Crew's opinion, do you believe that terms of reference should be set up before the members of the CAP panel are put in place?
Yes, definitely before the CAP panel members. It might be useful to have the chair appointed by that stage, if you can do it. But otherwise, it's very important to have those terms of reference to be set up so you know what you're getting into. So you know your the possible financial areas of risk, the possible areas of governance risk. You as councillors must have something along those lines.
Councillor Pravano, your next question.
Thank you. So, in the council report, it actually states that, I'm just following up on Councillor Janet's question or comment. In the report, it states that that the working group were not actually able to come to a consensus over the makeup of the CAP. Is that correct?
Correct. The working group made a decision. Subsequently, the office report has changed that.
Thank you. So you're saying that the the recommendation by council staff has not been agreed to by the working group?
That's correct.
Councillor Holliday.
Thank you for coming in, Quintin. Just clarifying something on the report back here as well. It says on point 26, the working group recommended that a chair is separately appointed and has expertise in facilitating, sharing and leading community projects, etc. And also that the chair is responsible for the final recommendation. Now, we've just gone through a process with our economic development strategy of having an independent panel, and it's got an independent chair as well. And would I be correct in thinking that the having the chair separately appointed is a form of governance, if you like, or should we say a form of keeping almost council a little bit in check with regards to the appointment of the people that are going into that committee, into the CAP group, as an oversight side of things. It's not solely going to be council. Would that be a fair representation of your view of what the chair's responsibility is? And does that allay any of your fears around the makeup of that group?
No, because in the report it states that council both appoints the chair and the panel members. So therefore, the chair, if the chair is appointed, he could be part of that appointment process, but it is not a given. The second issue with your is the independence of the chair is because of the diversity within the community, and that is the rationale for the independence of the chair.
Yeah, not a councillor at the moment. Just one question for you, Quinton, with regards to the composition that's been proposed by officers. Why do you think they would have put forward the composition on recommendation 35 versus what the working group had suggested?
Oh, sorry, hold on.
So, what was recommended from the panel, what was here?
That's good for.
Yep. But versus here, why do you think they would have made that decision?
I don't know.
Next question. No. That brings end to questions. Thank you very much. We do have Dr. Ian Daw, who was part of the working group. He's not making a presentation, but if councillors are inclined to ask him any questions, here's an opportunity. Councillor Holbrook.
Hi, and thanks very much for coming along. I just thought I might take the opportunity to ask you about the issue of terms of reference that's been talked about today. So I understand you've been involved in a couple of other of these projects, including the Makara Beach one, and you're very familiar with the Hawke's Bay model. How did they go about doing the terms of reference, and what was the timing around that? Do you recall?
I can't remember the specific details, but the working group report has got scope within that should guide the terms of reference, and my understanding is that the group helps shapes up those terms of reference with guidance and input that they have. So the report that we produce provides that scope and guidance to generate the terms of reference. I wouldn't expect that the terms of reference would be wildly different than the scope that's provided from that. And my understanding is that that's how the other panels have formed as well, but I don't have the exact details about how they went about that at Makara off the top of my head.
So you don't see a problem with us approving the recommendations today, and there's no kind of push-hooks here in terms of not having a terms of reference?
Because there is a very clear mandate on what has to be achieved. Yes, there will be some finer details to work out, but I agree with Joe Rosier in that the panel and the composition of that will help dictate what types of terms of reference are exactly bedded in. There will have to be an understanding of what the economic and financial implications would be. So I wouldn't see that the Coastal Advisory Panel is going to be developing some terms of reference that are wildly out of scope with what the project direction is.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great to have your expertise around this. Thanks a lot.
Councillor Compton, did I hear the answer has been answered? Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming along today. So you mentioned the Makara project and the Hawke's Bay project. Can you provide just a very brief summary of how successful those projects have been, please?
Those two projects had really good engagement with the communities. A bit of a weakness with those is that they didn't, during that process, confront what the economic realities might be to implement the particular pathways that were decided. And the outcome of that is that those councils have been, I guess, scrabbling around a little bit to try and find funding to fulfil the desires of those decisions from the recommendations from those groups. So my thinking, and I think the working group would agree with this, is that it's really important that those are discussed through that process so that at the end of it, there's a clear line of where the funding would come from in order to implement the outcomes of that from the panel.
Further question, Mr. Chair. So do you think by them having a good terms of reference at the beginning, it would have helped the outcomes in terms of something that could be enacted on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way in which those processes were run, there was a decision that they weren't going to discuss the financial implications throughout the process and only address it at the end. But I actually think you need to have more of an upfront discussion about the economic realities. Bearing in mind that there may always be, coming out of central government, there may be other options that we're not aware of at this stage, so it pays to keep a slightly open mind about where funding may come from.
Councillor Coates.
Thanks for coming in this morning. So thinking of your own organisation, how challenging is it, not just on coastal, but on any of the topics that you work with, to have iwi participation around the table? And then I've got a follow-up question.
This is a perennial issue, and we face it regularly and quite all the time, actually. And so, representing Greater Wellington, I've always, throughout the process, really recommended that iwi are heavily and strongly involved in the co-design and within the panel process, recognising that sometimes it is a problem for them to actually find the resource to do that. But I think we do need to strive, and on behalf of Greater Wellington, we would strongly support close iwi involvement in that and throughout this whole process.
Which leads to my follow-up question. I think you've partly answered that, but how important is it for them to be involved in terms of good decision-making and good policy and good outcomes?
Quite aside from our treaty obligations, it's extremely important because there are other processes in play, one of those being the Kapiti Tour. There are a lot of related land management issues and freshwater management issues which intersect very strongly with this process, and there are very strong mana whenua interests in those as well, so it's important that they're lined up.
Councillor Boswell.
Thank you for coming and sharing your insight with us today. I was just wondering, in terms of your experience working around the region and nationally, is it best practice to have a conversation in terms of the balance of the community and likewise with this working group? I know we've heard experiences from other people saying that this is best practice, and we've seen it in big organisations up north and so forth, where the balance is very much like what we've been prescribed today.
I think so. Again, this is a little bit of an emerging and developing area, this co-design and community panel type processes. So we're sort of feeling our way a little bit here. But as some of the treaty settlements come through and the recognition of the importance of meeting our treaty obligations, mana whenua are seen as a critical partner within that. In order to give them voice, because often there hasn't been a Māori or mana whenua voice around decision-making tables, and this is a way of, I guess, redressing some of that balance from past decisions that have been made in absence of mana whenua and the major impact that's had on iwi and the environment and their connection, I guess, their connection with freshwater as well. So I guess this is trying to redress some of those lack of balance in the decision makings in the past.
Thank you very much for coming here. Look, that brings an end to this part of it. Can I take the opportunity of thanking the members of the working group, the North Otaki Beach Residents Group, the Waikanae Eastery Group, and crew, particularly because I've got corporate memory in terms of the issue going back to 2012. It's been a long struggle. At the same time, I also recognize Natalia Ripia or Ngāti Toa saying that they've been waiting since 1840. That puts it in context. Thank you for the work that you've done, and may the outcomes be really good for everybody. Thank you. We now come back to the substantive report that's on your page 7. We have got Lindsay Craig, the Coastal Manager, and Sean Mellon, Group Manager, Infrastructure Services.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure if there's much that we want to add to the paper. There was a question, I think Mr. Dunmore raised an issue, and I think Mr. Poole sort of touched on it, about the implications or the value or the costs or the assets that we currently maintain within that coastal area, and the commitment from the council, I guess, as to what level of commitment is currently applied to those. So at the moment, we have there's about 269 structures, public structures that sit in that coastal marine area, and they were surveyed and condition assessed back in 2016-17, so they form the basis for the Coastal Asset Management Plan, and they also form the basis for the some $44.5 million that sits in the current LTP over the next 20 years in terms of expected renewal. So the current position is that, as per the current policy, that we would continue to replace and renew those assets as and when they got to the end of their useful life, and that's, I guess, set against that $44.5 million that sits within the current LTP. Obviously, we're currently looking at the new LTP, and there's some changes in there in terms of the condition of some of those assets that have a financial implication, but that is information that would obviously be provided into the panel itself at the start of that process. I think, I'm not sure if there was another question there that hasn't been addressed in terms of the terms of reference. Again, officers are supportive of the view that was expressed by some of the members of the panel there in terms of allowing the group itself to be involved in that process with assistance and advice from council, and obviously that would come back then to council for final sign-off in terms of those terms of reference. And the other one was membership. I think in the initial public speaking there around crew membership of the panel, there's certainly nothing at the moment that precludes members of crew from applying or going through that selection process and being nominated to the panel itself once that process gets started. And I think that was all of the... I think there was a question around the chair, and the chair maybe not being involved in the panel selection process. I think was the chair, as states in the report, would be part of the panel selection process, and that's the recommendation both in the working group report and further endorsed in the officers' report. I think maybe that's, unless you want to talk about, so there was the difference between the remuneration for the panel members. Basically, the officers' report is just reflecting the current council policy on those and how they're structured. So that's why there's a difference between the working group's report and the officers' recommendation. And again, the difference in terms of the panel membership, in terms of iwi participation, is as per references back into the report, and that process has come back through a recommendation from iwi members in the working group, and then further endorsed through the Te Whakamininga o Kapiti meeting that was last week. So in terms of time frame, hasn't been a lot of time, and we did go back and raise that with the working group. But obviously, as you've heard today, there wasn't consensus in terms of that agreement. So that's why you have an alternative recommendation from the staff in the report itself. So we're happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Coates.
Look, Councillor Randall actually had his name up before me. I know it's gone off the screen, but I just...
That was only a brief question. Thank you for giving away. Sean, just a brief question about the panel chair and the selection. You recommend 3 councillors, the chair of the strategy and operation, the mayor, and the deputy mayor. Do you think that's a very narrow base? Should it be more broad based?
So that recommendation is from the working group in terms of the structure of that selection panel and the process itself, and we're comfortable that provides enough flexibility or enough scope to work through that process.
From what I can gather, 2 of the main points of contention are around the composition, the makeup of the group, and the fees that were suggested not being recommended. Was the working party made aware of the council's fees and charges policy and discounted them? Or did they make determinations around the fees and charges and then councils put their view in terms of the report around council's policy, because there's a difference?
My understanding is that they were not aware of the meeting that I attended where that was discussed. There were some figures provided by the group itself, and I don't believe we had access to that at the time, but Lindsay might be able to.
Yeah, what we provided at the time were examples of the remuneration for other similar groupings, so that's the way that was approached at that particular meeting, and then we had the policy overlaid over the top of that, which showed the discrepancy between the two. It was there wasn't initially going to be valuations put into the working group report, and at the last meeting we had, those figures were put forward by the working group.
Could I maybe... Sorry, Tanika, I pushed my button again. I shouldn't have. Could I maybe clarify my question a bit further so that helped me understand the answer? If what I'm hearing is the group came up with a set of fees, unbeknown to the fees that are in the council's fees and charges policy for remunerating non-elected members, and what I'm hearing you say is that they were then at some point informed of the council's fees and charges policy and the structure, but discounted that, or was there were they not given a chance to not reach consensus on that? And then I have a follow-up question.
No, that policy was not presented to the working group, so the conversations that were had regarding that were in isolation of it, and the fees that were put forward were, I think, by one of the representatives of the working group, and that was discussed. During the discussions with the working group around payment of fees to the panel, there were actually some members of the working group that felt that they shouldn't be paid. So there was quite a bit of discussion around the morals around payment for being part of a panel. And so where it landed was that working group just putting forward an arbitrary figure. And so, no, there was no consideration of council policy.
Okay. I've got two more questions. The second one, in all of the court proceedings and involvement in legal matters, is there any expectation that there is a specific member from any of the interest groups on the CAP panel?
Not that I'm aware of, no. The memorandum of understanding and talks about working collaboratively and working together. I'm not aware of any specific direction to incorporate membership on any
So no
panel.
legal direction to have any, whether it be No Brig crew or whoever, on that CAP panel?
Not to my knowledge. Tim Power is here and has been involved in those, but I don't believe that there is. I haven't seen any reference to that, and Tim's certainly shaking his head.
Okay. Can I just clarify too the last question in terms of the panel makeup? I understand that the group, the working party, reached consensus on the diagram that we see in the appendix. That was obviously there was a differing view from iwi that was through the Te Whakaminanga meeting. That alternative view around the makeup was tested with the working group and didn't reach consensus. Is that correct?
Might be helpful if I just talk through the process a little bit for that.
To do that.
Yeah. So the table that is part of the working group paper was discussed at the working group meetings at which iwi representatives were not present. So that was put forward into the paper. The direction at that working group meeting was to go and speak to our iwi representatives about that proposition. The feedback and what we discussed at Te Whakaminanga was for equal representation. Directly following that meeting with TWOC, the working group paper you have in front of you, plus the proposed composition table as discussed and recommended, was circulated by email to the working group, and it was clearly indicated in that email that unless the working group reached consensus on that, it would not be included. And just on that point to clarify, the terms of reference for the working group sets out what support is and isn't, and that was every single member of the group clearly supports or can live with it, which is why there's a fees ended up there despite not all of them completely agreeing. There was strong opposition from one member of that working group. That's why it's not in the paper. However, others did indicate support, as you've heard today.
So could I clarify in your response that it was clear to the working group that in the absence of iwi in that particular meeting, that it was going to that advice from iwi is going to be sought, e.g. through Te Whakaminanga?
That was specifically requested by the working group to do that. The officers would do that.
Okay. Thanks, Lindsay.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, just picking up on a point from earlier on in this discussion that Councillor McCann brought up in terms of the terms of reference have been a contentious point in the development on them. So my understanding is that they get developed, but they'll come back to Council for us to approve, and then we have an opportunity at that point to make changes to them.
That's correct. That's the intended process.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you.
Councillor Holbrook.
I'm just trying to clarify something I asked before, which I don't think was quite clear. So there wasn't consensus reached around the numbers in the table at paragraph 24 and the consensus was around the numbers in paragraph 24, but after that there's a paragraph 25 which describes this is in the working group report, which describes the selection process for panel members and the attributes those members have, and it doesn't make reference to any particular interest groups or anything like that. So there was consensus reached around that, and that has not changed. Am I right about that?
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Sean and Lindsay, for the work that's gone into this report. I just wanted to just ask for clarification on page 16. This is in the Working Party report that shows the, I suppose, the whole connectivity of the various groups and how they're going to work. And I see there that it says that the Community Asset Panel is going to be reporting directly to KCDC. So I suppose my question is, how often is that going to occur? And so the report is going to come directly to us, and KCDC will basically just do a cover page. Is that correct?
Correct. Similar to the process we've just run with the working group. So the panel itself would report directly to Council, and again, as our duty as officers would be to advise you of certain considerations. And the regularity of that reporting is to be determined. However, it would be regular reporting and obviously the final recommendations as they were coming up throughout that process.
So they would be determined in the terms of reference, for example?
Yes, that's
okay.
scheduling,
Okay.
as was the case with this current working group.
Good. I mean, just to add, I guess when we went through the technical advisory group for the water supply project, they had a similar structure, and even though they weren't providing a report as such with recommendations, the chair and the group presented to Council in terms of updates as the project progressed. So there are options both there that they could come along, or the chair could come along and update the Council on how things were going, as well as potentially being accompanied by a report and maybe a more formal covering report. So those would be considered as part of the project moving forward.
Thank you. So I see also in that structure there you've got the technical advisory group. So how do they, what type of advice are they going to be giving to the community asset panel when my assumption is that panel will also have experts on it?
The community assessment panel is about community representation. As you can see in the working group report, there's some certain indications of the sort of qualities and experience we would like to see around that panel, but we certainly wouldn't be taking them on board as technical experts.
Right, okay.
A procurement process went through earlier in the year, which Council revised on, and members of the working group sat on the procurement project team for the coastal science and engineering. So they're our technical experts, as well as our in-house council members that are employed. So they wouldn't need to go through any sort of process to be part of that.
Thank you.
You finish? Councillor Coates, you've got a question.
My apologies, Your Worship. I had one further question. There's been numerous comments around memorandum of understandings of partnerships, of community and so forth. It might be helpful in terms of us around good decision making to have some clarity around the differences between all of those that have been mentioned, so that it's really clear to members around the table when making the decision, the differences between the community, between memorandums of understanding, between partnerships and agreements and so forth. I'm not too sure whether staff can help explain the difference.
Thanks, Sean.
Or Janice might be able to.
Do you want me to speak?
Well, so we can provide some comment with regard to the memorandum of understanding, I guess, but in terms of that iwi partnership relationship, I don't think I'm well placed. Janice is probably much better placed.
Kia ora, and Kahu, jump in if you need to save me at any point here. We consider our partnership with iwi in the same way that actually Natalia described it, as a special partnership that is different in nature to our other partnerships. In part, that's obviously because of the legislative situation and also because of the content that is included in the Memorandum of Partnership document that this council and councils before it have signed. Actually, councils before it, we haven't put an updated Memorandum of Partnership to this council, but we'll be doing that. In terms of other community groups, we have a range of mechanisms that set out the different types of relationships that we have with community groups. If you look at our website, you will see that in past times we have used the word partnership to describe our relationships with some of those groups, namely the Youth Council, the Older Persons Council, and what has now become the Accessibility Advisory Group. I am not sure, I am not aware of any other formal mechanisms that we would say represent a partnership agreement with community groups in that same sense. We may use the word partnership, but would be using different mechanisms to create that partnership and those relationships.
In terms of hierarchy, I don't know if that's the right word, are they treated as equal in terms of the term partnership?
The partnerships are different in their nature, but I think that it is fair to say that collectively we all see and consider our partnership with iwi to sit high above a number of other relationships and partnerships that we have.
Thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Can I just get some clarity on the Community Assessment Panel? The recommendation that's come through from Council mentions KCDC Kaumatua. Can you just give me some clarity around that position, please?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. The paper number 35, page 10, you have added the KCDC Kaumatua, which didn't come as a recommendation from the assessment panel. Can you clarify why that was added in?
Yes, following discussions and at Te Whakamengo, the agreement was that to ensure that there's some balance across those two sides of that panel and observers group. On the observers side, you've got councillors in those roles and community board members, but there was an absence of iwi representation on that observer role, which rightfully would sit with our Kaumatua in that space, Korodon. And that was as a result of recommendations and agreements at Te Whakamengo. And just to sort of further that conversation, is the Kaumatua is and I can't speak to this, it should be Kahu or Natalia, but is a crucially important role that we would be in the right place on both sides of that composition.
Also, something that's been mentioned is funding for this. Where is the funding coming from with regards to the payment of this? Is this being allocated as part of the process at the moment, or is that coming into the long-term plan discussion?
It will come back through the long-term plan process to the council. So currently looking at all of those issues that relate to funding for next year or the next 20 years. So that will come back through that process.
All right, thank you.
Right, nobody else?
I'm happy to move the recommendations. 45, 46 and 47 on page 11 of the agenda.
Right, can I have a seconder? Councillor Compton. right of intro.
I won't add anything more. We've had a very robust conversation today, and we've noted that the terms of reference are going to come back for ratification by Council, and I'm very comfortable that we've received some good answers to the questions raised today.
We're now in debate. Gwyn?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank staff and members of the working group for the blood, sweat, and I think often literally tears that they've put into this process. It's been alluded to today. This is a challenging space to be working in. Coastal adaptation and the related climate policy is immensely complex, and we're seeing the country dealing with that, and there's no easy answers across the board, and there's I think we need to be blunt that ultimately the solutions probably aren't going to be cheap either, and we'll need central government to come to the table to help out local communities dealing with this. I'm happy to support the recommendations as they stand. I think, as we've heard, yes, there's not absolute consensus around some of the things there, but I think the comments we've heard from Jill on behalf of North Otaki and Ian on behalf of Greater Wellington, I think they give us heart that things are going in the right direction, and we're going, you know, provided we keep a good oversight of this process, we're going to get a good outcome. We're going to have the terms of reference come back to council. We're going to still be involved. It's not like we're hands off of this. We, as governors, we still have an ability to influence this as it's going forward. I'd also like to personally support the recommendation that came from staff from iwi for representation to go from 3 to 6. I think that's hugely important. I was very offended with a letter we received last night from one of the working panel members that likened that recommendation to a brutal system of social and political and cultural and economic and racial segregation. I think that was completely inappropriate, and I think that was a grave insult to the millions of people who suffered under that regime and are still dealing with the consequences and impacts of that today. You know, as a community, as a country, Aotearoa is way ahead of the rest of the world in dealing with the impacts of colonisation. We still have an immense way to go. We're seeing the way that we as a country deal with that has changed remarkably just in the last decade, let alone the 30 years since 1990 and that 150-year anniversary and the work that Jim Bolger got underway with the Waitangi Tribunal there. So I think these sorts of things that bring mana whenua into having their rightful place as partners of the Crown, I think that's hugely important, and I really applaud iwi for their work. I know that the demands on them, they're hard for us to comprehend, and I think Natalia spoke very well when she talked about the 11 councils that Ngāti Toa has to operate over. And then they've got all the other agencies that Councillor Coots alluded to as well. So, you know, I'm very happy to support these recommendations today and commend staff for their amazing work on this.
Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Somewhat endorsing Councillor Compton's comments, I must admit I did have some concerns about the process of all this coming into this meeting today. But what was very, very helpful for me was with the comments and the various comments from the different parts of the working party that's put this all together. We have got a dynamic relationship with iwi, and I'm certainly seeing some very positive movements in that space through the conversations we've been having in various aspects of council. And I think we have to be aware that in the Māori world and the iwi world, things do work a little bit differently, but we have to come to a situation that's balanced and works for all of us. Also note the comments by Crew around governance, and it's going to be very, very important for us in that governance role in this space. From that point of view, I will be supporting this moving forward. Thank you very much.
Councillor Coates.
I just want to acknowledge the comments from Councillor Compton as well and agree with them wholeheartedly. As I said earlier, what I can gather from the feedback and the emails that we received as well, fundamentally there are two issues that had been raised with the paper. One was around the composition and the second one was around the fees. If I look at the fees, the suggestion from staff wasn't to reduce the fees if you look at the total cost. So it's not an effort to pay people less. It's simply a reflection of the council's policy on fees and charges. under questioning, it's clear that the panel members weren't aware of the fees and charges, and maybe a lesson for us in terms of moving forward around these types of groups. Had they been aware of that, who knows? We may have just had those fees and charges put forward as a recommendation. We can't assume today that that would have been the case, but one would certainly consider that if there was an intention for a remuneration, to remunerate more rather than less would probably be supported. So that one for me is not an issue. Then we will look at the question around the makeup. Look, councils around the country would be envious of the commitment and the willingness from iwi to have this level of participation in a particular project. Again, it is no secret that they struggle to get people iwi involved. And to hear Natalia here today on behalf of Ngāti Toa and also of other iwi, their willingness to participate and put forward the numbers that they are, I think speaks volumes to the work that this council is doing in that space in terms of working with iwi. And so I want to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge the taki that Natalia has put down today and earlier in the week. So for me, I think that that should be commended, that we have that level of involvement from iwi. And for that reason, I'm comfortable with the paper today. I think it, as Councillor Compton said, you only have to open up stuff.co.nz to read about these issues challenging councils and communities all across the country daily and weekly. This issue is not going away. So the sooner we can move this forward, the sooner that we can bring the CAP group together and start deliberating over the way that we move this district forward to consider the very things that speakers have said today around what do we do, around do we retreat, do we protect, and so forth. I think we need to get on with it, and so I'm happy to support the recommendations and just acknowledge the work that the staff and the members involved in creating this have put into this.
Councillor McCann.
Thank you. I'd just like to commend also the remarks from Councillor Compton that certainly I was very pleased to hear, and I think we should all take many of those remarks about the country that we live in and the journey that we're on, and our role in helping to ensure that we get to a destination where we're comfortable with. I'm also very comfortable with the discussion around what our role as governors are, and the fact that we are ensuring that there are experts and those people in the community who are mandated to listen and bring that information back to us to then make a final decision. So I think the panel has done an excellent job. Not only in that, but also in looking at the panel, the grouping of the panel and who will make it up, who will take part in that. The challenge for us as a council is not just looking at climate mitigation, but it is to set an example so that we can ensure that other people who are much larger than us look at what we're doing, not just to mitigate the effects of climate change, but what we're going to do. And I'm very confident that this council, despite what a former mayor might have suggested, that we are taking significant steps, and at every conversation, Sophie's voice and the wider voice of the communities that we represent is heard. So I can only commend the panel and the work of the staff in putting this paper together, and just acknowledge that, as Councillor Compton said, this is an area of contention. It is very hard for everyone to agree because Mother Nature is doing things to us that might be the result of us doing things to her in the past and currently. And it is a very difficult balance to find how we react to that. So we can never have full consensus, but we must try and work respectfully together. And I think everyone who's presented their voice today respectfully, whether we agree with you or not, we have listened, and I thank you for that.
Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first of all, I'd like to really thank all the council staff, excuse me, and the working panel who've done so much work over a very long time to get to where we are today. But I have some concerns, and I suppose I feel that there have been some time constraints which have brought the paper to us today, And as a result of that, there are some issues that I cannot overlook, and those are around governance. So there are two instances of where the Working Party haven't actually agreed to two aspects. One is actually payment, and one is for iwi representation. I actually support the number of iwi that are being proposed by them on the Working Party, but the Working Party needs to agree to that. So here we are, we're actually building the blocks to actually setting up a structure here. There's a lot of contention, and so I believe that needs to be ticked off before we move forward. I also believe that the terms of reference for the cap need to be set in place before we move forward. Now, I suppose the issue too is that the Working Party is meant to resolve tomorrow, which is problematic. So at this point in time, well, in fact, I won't be supporting the recommendations that are on the table at present, and I would actually like to propose some more. Okay.
Hold on, the Mayor hasn't said this. I'm actually quite heartened by the level of debate that's happening. I've been around here as a reporter covering this for 16 years as a journalist. In the last few years as elected member and now mayor. For the first time I see the tide has risen in terms of your recognition of our treaty obligations, because the government legislation and everything is moving rapidly towards that direction. What we are seeing now is the beginnings of this process being birthed, but it will be painful at times because that's the nature of the beast, where you have the tyranny of the majority, if you like, in a democracy versus the liberal democracy sense that the individual and minority groups have rights. But the treaty has empowered this, and this is unfolding. So all I'm saying now is congratulations to the councillors who participated in this. Thank you to the working group. Thank you to the staff who put in a lot of work in this. Well done. But this is just the beginning of the journey. There will be harder decisions, I can tell you that. But remember this day that we put a stake in the ground. Thank you. Councillor Holbrook, right of reply.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I think that they were actually fantastic final words, and I don't really want to follow them. So I just want to tautoko the wonderful comments that have been made around the council table today. There's been some really beautiful words spoken, and to me sometimes principle overrides process. And sure, we may not have ticked all the boxes in terms of a sign-off by the working group that was put together in terms of some of the panel composition, but we've heard so strongly today argued how important that principle of collaboration with our iwi partners is. And we had the honour of seeing a wonderful presentation from Natalia earlier in the week, which delved quite deeply into Te Ao Māori. And we've heard from Ian Dorr today about the importance on a pragmatic level of the level of skill that's brought by our iwi partners as well. So I have no problem with the adjustments that were made to the panel composition by the staff. I'd like to acknowledge the working group for the work that they've done so far, and in particular our staff as well, and Natalia for what you've brought. And I know it hasn't been easy, and I want to acknowledge that. And I want to wish the working group that's going to be formed, the CAG group that's going to be formed, well going forward, because as we've heard, we don't always agree in this space, and it's tough, and there's hard calls to make, and there's hard discussions to be had. But what I would like to see as a member of this council is a level of respect and a quality of discussion and a quality of engagement that happens through that process, so that we can really work to address this absolutely crucial issue. So with that, I'm happy to move these recommendations, and thanks to everybody who's brought them to the table.
Right, thank you very much. The recommendations 45, 46, 47 have been moved by Councillor Holbrook, seconded by Councillor Compton. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Aye. Carried.
She had her vote recorded.
Or did you have your vote? Do you want your vote recorded? As against? One abstention, and it's recorded.
That way I don't have to rattle off every
That's right. Yeah.
I'm just being lazy.
Thank you very much. I think we need a break. Lunch is served. We'll come back at 1. And is Kim Kelly here? Kim, sorry it's taken so long, but I'll move your item up when we come back.